So I'll start. Welcome after our invigorating keynote. So when we go to Q&A, I'm going to start with, tell me more, and to what extent? We're all set to go. So a big welcome and welcome to our lovely panelists. Thank you for joining us, and we're here to discuss the parent role, which I think is always a hot and fascinating topic. So I'd like to briefly introduce our panelists, and then we'll start. The way we're going to do it is we're going to ask each of them to speak for 5 to 7 minutes. And our note taker, who's Anelia, I'm sorry, thank you, who's very kindly also going to time panelists, is going to give you 1 minute for 5, and this means no more. Okay? At which point I hit you with the water bottle. So, and then we're going to decide. We might have a bit of back and forth, but what I'd really like to do is get to Q&A, because I find that's the really stimulating part of the, of the workshop like this. So I'd like to introduce, last but certainly not least, Mr. Naeem Siddique. He is a high school principal and the former president of Ontario Principals Council. And because we're in education, we love acronyms. OPC, representing 5,000 school administrators across Ontario. He was in that role last year. He has been involved in the local OPC Association, the Toronto School Administrators Association, which is TSAA, the OPC Provincial Council, I'm not even going there, and the OPC Provincial Executive for almost a decade. He also sat on the Education Minister's Principal Reference Group and numerous working tables that look at issues in education. Welcome, Naeem. Moving down the table, we have Arlene Morel, and Arlene has been a parent leader at the local and system level for more than 15 years. She is the founder of the Thames Valley Parent Involvement Committee, TVPIC, and has a long history as a parent engagement advocate. As chair of the TVPIC, or PIC, she has championed a wide variety of issues, including parent leadership and involvement, anti-violence, bullying initiatives, healthy and safe schools, mental health programming for special needs students, and more. Welcome, Arlene.
Thank you.
Is everybody familiar with PICs? Everybody knows what they are, parent involvement councils, right? Committees, sorry, mandated by, thank you, Annie, mandated by the province. Next is Ruth Flynn. Ruth is the director of the Inclusive Education Branch, Ministry of Education. Ruth and her team work closely with diverse education and community partners to lead the development and implementation of Ontario's award-winning equity and inclusive education strategy and parent engagement policy. Ruth has demonstrated a commitment to excellence and collaboration, working across ministries and with diverse stakeholders, establishing cross-sector partnerships, obviously using integrative thinking, to effect positive, sustainable, systemic change. Ruth holds an Honours BA and MA in Political Science from UWO, University of Western Ontario. She is a proud and engaged parent. And welcome, Ruth. Last but not least, to my left, we have Ms. Annie Kidder. I learned a lot about you that I didn't know. I got to tell. Yes, no. Annie's looking a little concerned too. Social media. It's always good to have the people who write these very close to you, Annie. Annie was born in Quebec and has lived in Labrador, British Columbia, and Ontario. Her father was in mining, so her family moved frequently. As a result, Annie attended 12 schools between kindergarten and grade 12, which may have been how she acquired her passion for public education. Annie is a former theater director, which I think kind of we guessed, and became involved in education through her children's school. She has 2 daughters, one in her first year of university and the other a university graduate. Bravo. Annie is the recipient of numerous awards for her advocacy work, including awards from the Canadian Teachers Federation, the OPC, which is the Ontario Principals Council, come on, stay with me, the Toronto Community Foundation, and the Ontario Teachers Federation. She has spoken at conferences across the country and is regularly quoted in the media as an expert on education issues. Welcome, Annie. So I'd like you to join me in welcoming her. So the blurb that I have, I'm Cassie Bell. I've been I have 4 children, and I've been involved in education and education politics because I believe the two are inseparable for many years. And I've worked in various, both inside and outside, sort of education systems. So I was an education activist with something called the Toronto Parent Network. I've been a school council chair, and I've also worked with a school board, the TDSB as a matter of fact, on the Inner City Advisory Committee. So I've seen the inside and the outside of both worlds. The parent role is an incredibly important one, but it's not always an easy one to navigate. So given that parent involvement is an integral part of student success, which is now proven, I mean, we now all accept that as part of research, but what kind of involvement really makes a difference? So we're now getting to not just the generic parent involvement helps student success, but we're actually, we're getting down to the nitty-gritty. Is it serving on a school council or parent involvement committee, or is it volunteering on a field trip or being involved in your kid's classroom? Is it helping with homework? Not an issue. Or does it have to do with how you act as a parent? Is it as simple as having general conversations about school? So that keynote was very interesting, I think, in terms of what is the parent role and how does it feed into one's child's understanding of what their role is in their own education. Or do you have to be able to do math and talk about the War of 1812? How many of you have done the volcano project? Okay, yeah, ours was a total dud. Total dud. So, beginning with those questions, I'm going to ask, do you mind beginning, Naeem? And we'll ask you to give us your very valued opinion.
Okay, thanks very much for inviting me here. I'm looking forward to a very interesting discussion. So currently I'm a secondary principal in Toronto. I've spent my whole career as an educator in Etobicoke. I started teaching in what I would describe as a middle to high income part of the city, and then sort of moved my way up north to the north part of Etobicoke, which has many challenges. People joke with me that usually it's supposed to go the other way, but I kind of enjoy going in that direction because I'm finding, to be honest, the job more rewarding and a little bit more honest with kids as opposed to sometimes the political forces that happen in those other neighborhoods. And I'm hope today to sort of tell you from our perspective what I think, maybe what's working or what's worked as someone in the system as a principal. The things that I hope to hear about today is some discussion around, I believe that many of the things that have been done to involve parents have been very useful to involve political parents, or people that have agendas, or people that are very good at sort of bringing an agenda forward, which many times they are using the school setting to forward their agenda. And for ourselves in the school system, it's kind of like, you want to have involvement, but then the first day those 3 parents show up, the other 20 go home. Yeah. And then you're basically battling the rest of the year. And then when people come to you later on and say things like, how come no one comes to your school council, what can you do better? You can't say, I want to get rid of those 3. You end up managing.
You went to our school.
You end up managing very well. You can without relationship, but then trying to find other vehicles to connect with the other kids. I also believe that there's a real inequity in the system when it comes to the way we deal with immigrant cultures and how we reach out to those parents. Because we look at the way the tools kind of relate very well to our systems and our political reality, but create even more disengagement, I believe, with immigrant populations because it's almost setting up parent involvement in a way that makes them feel like they're not involved or they can't speak, as opposed to what's available to them. And I do believe I'm very, when I read the stuff that comes out, and that's very survey research based, that it's very good advice, because I do think that there's a big difference between being involved in the school and being involved in your kid's life, and they're two very different things. I've had many a kid in my office crying, saying, my mom doesn't really want to talk to me, or my dad doesn't know what's going on, but meanwhile they're on school council and they're very involved. So that balance is interesting. I have 2 kids in elementary school. It does bother me that my wife has to go downtown shopping for things that go in their homework project, wondering who's really doing the work and what's the evaluation there. My kids are very active in things like hockey and baseball, and I sometimes feel like I have to protect that time at night from the school and day, even as an educator, because I question the value of some of the stuff that that takes time away from them. And I've talked to people at the table, even my analogy of being a hockey coach, where an example where I had a parent come to me and say, can you talk to my son about what happened in the game and the decision the coaching staff made? And I asked the parent, did you think what we did was fair? And he said, yes, absolutely, it was the right thing to do, and my son needs to understand that, but can you explain that to him? And I said to the parent, no problem, but understand I've stopped coaching, I've started parenting. If you need some help to do that, I will do that, but understand that's the hat I will wear as I help parent your child. And the conversation went on for a while, because I struggle with a number of people that feel that just because something is hard for a kid, it's bad for a kid. And that sort of helicopter parenting that's happening, where you eliminate everything that's difficult in the kid's life, and some people have done that. The obsession to find a school with a nice letter beside it that makes it feel like I've done my job and put the kid in the right school with a specialized program, even though they're traveling an hour on the bus to get there, and my job is done. In reality, your job's never done. And those are the kind of things that trying to find ways to engage with parents to do that. I'll give you an example where in my school community, there's a real deep misunderstanding of special education and IEPs and IPRCs, but there is no vehicle for me to talk to them. Parent council with 3 parents, going out to, and I can tell you in my opinion, school council has never been a vehicle to talk to parents. School council has always been most places I've been, especially secondary, a political animal. It's never been an effective tool to get to the greater masses. Finding ways to do that is a challenge. I've had some successes and some failures. And, at some point in time in this workshop, I can share with you what I think the differences were. But for example, I was at one school where the parents are demanding IEPs and want more of them for the kids. I go 20 minutes down the road and everybody wants them out because they think it's a label and so forth. And for me to talk to the parents, if we had an information session and so forth, community leaders have actually gone to parents and say, don't go to that thing. They're trying to brainwash you about IEPs and so forth. So those are the kind of challenges that we live with, and you can, again, understand that while school council is difficult, I have yet to meet a parent who doesn't show up in 5 minutes when I call, when it's about their kid. So I'm not really sure if that's a bad thing, and which one would I rather have? An active school council, but parents I can't get a hold of because they're busy and so forth, or an inactive school council and parents who drop everything and even leave the faculty line to come see me in 5 minutes because I've talked about their kid. Who's to say what's better? So, so those are the kind of things that I hope we get to, and like I said, I hope we start really challenging what it is school parent involvement actually looks like, as opposed to the check marks where, I had a school council when I arrived at the school, 25 parents came and screamed at me for about 2 months. Then they stopped coming, and I said, why don't you come? They said, why would we come? We're happy.
Dear.
So those are the kind of things that, different sides of what different things kind of look like. So, I'm glad to be here, and I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Naeem. I think we've got some real potential for integrative thinking there. The either or. Thanks very much. Arlene, what do you think the parent role should look like?
Well, in addition to school councils, we also have other ways that parents can be involved. So I'll just build on that piece to begin. We also have home and school associations. And so there are multiple ways for parents to be engaged and involved. And reflecting on some of the ideas that this topic instilled in myself, I looked at some of the more current research that was undertaken by the ABC Life Literacy that says that 6 in 10 parents say they'd like more time to spend, or have more time to spend helping their children learn at home. And I think that that's really encouraging, because it's not always the messages that we get as parents. And that most, or 70% of parents, believe that they are their child's best teacher. And so when we take a look at what it is that parents are saying and what's happening in our schools, is maybe where there is that disconnect. So I say, let's begin by defining what is involvement and what is engagement. What does it mean to us as parents? What does that mean to educators? And how can we come to work better together? Because at the bottom or the end of the day, what this is really about is our students, our society, Ontario, actually as a province. So certainly when parents volunteer as classroom in the schools, as readers on field trips, they're participating. But that engaged in education is more than just a role for parents. It's a role for all of us collectively, that we all have a role to play in ensuring that our schools are our great places. As I look at some of the more recent work in parent involvement and in parent engagement, we start to talk about that more meaningful dialogue, and a dialogue that could begin with, who has the authority to define parent involvement or parent engagement, and who legitimizes that definition? Where's that coming from? Or, and actually, how does that then play out in our schools and in our communities? We like to, part of the importance and what it is that we like to continue to discuss from the home and school perspective is that the school and the home are very connected, and the community is part of that home and that school. And how does that then play out in our education system? I think what Naeem was referring to was that there's 3 critical pieces in parent engagement and parent involvement, and that is the efficacy skills that we develop as parents. Are we effective? Do we feel that we're effective? And as parent leaders in the school, is the role for the school council or the role for the home school association to help parents develop those efficacy skills. How it is that parents construct their role, how it is that we construct our role to be involved and engaged. What does that mean to us, and what does it mean to our children? What does that mean to education? And then that sense of invitation. We look at the literature. Is it written in a way that builds on parents' capacity and parents' strength? Parent involvement, parent engagement is a strength-based approach, or is it a deficit-based approach? What is it that we do for, or what is it that we're not? What is it that we're not doing? If you look at that same piece of research that came from the ABC Literacy, it talks about that learning happens in our schools, and that there's many of opportunities for learning to be happening. It talks about learning happens when we're doing our laundry as an opportunity to teach. And I'm just looking at my notes because I copied and pasted it. I thought it was a really interesting perspective. When we're traveling, are we using that as an opportunity? When we're participating in sports, is that an opportunity, and are we using those teachable moments in our lives? And how does that then interact with the way that we're involved and engaged at schools? So clearly there's benefits, and they're well documented. Certainly in the 15 years that I've been involved, we've seen tremendous growth, we've seen tremendous movement in recognizing that we are partners and that we have that really important role to play, and that the more that we're involved and engaged in school and in life, our children and society will be richer for it. I'm not sure how my time is at.
You're fine.
That we develop, that we move towards a culture that reinforces school leaders and parents as partners, that we're not adversaries. We were talking last night, has advocacy become a bad word? Mm-hmm. And I believe and have experienced that when we advocate in a positive manner, we work from that place where we're appreciating each other's roles, and we're using that strength-based capacity, then we actually are advocating for ourselves, our role, and our students, and we'll have a richer, more meaningful dialogue for it. That we're not just managing complaints, that we're not just managing that complaint piece, where we're looking at the deficits, that we're moving towards building on those strengths. And then I think that there's a place for meaningful professional development, that we're recognized as leaders in our communities. When we have that place to hone those leadership skills, that we then can better connect parents who we perceive to not be involved and engaged, that as peer parent leaders, we then have the ability and the professional place to develop those skills to be able to better engage parents and better work with the professionals within education. I'll stop there.
Thank you. I wrote down a whole bunch of, you asked us a bunch of questions, I wrote down a whole bunch more. That was great.
Tell me more.
I think when you said home and school, you're talking about the home and school association,
Yes.
like not home and school.
Right, so home and
Yeah.
school association.
Yeah.
So in Thames Valley, for example, and across the province, we have school councils and we also have home school associations. That's great. And the Ontario Federation is one of 4 recognized provincial parent groups as well.
All right.
Thanks. Ruth?
Okay, well, 5 minutes to 7 minutes, there's so much happening, and it's so exciting. We have the Equity and Inclusive Education Strategy, and part of this strategy, which is really trying to look at discriminatory biases and systemic barriers that can affect student achievement and well-being, because we've moved from beyond just looking at the student, recognizing you have to have a holistic approach, which is the integrated approach. The parent piece is absolutely critical, and it's been mentioned about the research, whether it's Henderson and Mapp or Epstein or Ken Leithwood, and we're doing some more work with Ken Leithwood to take some practical field experience working with boards and merging that with research to better inform us. We are also looking at research like Stepping Stones, which was put out with the Ministry of Community and Youth Services, which talks and will help you in terms of the youth from 12 to 25 in terms of cognitive development, physical development. How can I figure out about my teenager? Why is this? Why does it change? So within the ministry and the government, we're taking an integrated approach. We have an expert panel. Annie was there, and it's an interdisciplinary panel where you've not only got Dr. Bruce Ferguson, but Dr. Jean Clinton, really looking at what are evidence-informed strategies, practices that support a whole school approach. Because, as Arlene was saying, we all have a responsibility, we all have a role. That includes the parents and the students, the teachers, the administrators, and the staff. And what can we do to support a positive school environment? But for parents, how can you support your child's learning at home and at school? And our approach has been that, first of all, we've got a parent policy. It's the first official parent policy. And basically what we do is we recognize that there are many, many forms of parent engagement and involvement. It's on the ministry website. And I think that's critical because we're people. You know, and he mentioned, well, if you're a newcomer, you don't necessarily know how to navigate the system, and you might feel more comfortable, and maybe you decide you want to be on the school council, but, you know, by the time your child's in secondary school, you know, I've got an aging parent, and we've got this, and I've got this activity, and I don't necessarily won't be on the school council, but it doesn't mean that I'm any less concerned or less engaged with my child's learning. And so we recognize the critical role that our parents play, and that is supported by research. And so what we've done is the policy provides a framework, recognizes that, you know, 4 different strategies looking at supporting a school climate right through to having tools for parents to engage. And I think there's a real change that's really critical. It isn't sort of saying, well, you know, you don't know what you're doing as a parent. What are you doing? It's, do you need some help here? Here are some strategies. Have you dealt with that? It's a very different kind of approach, recognizing that we all have gifts and strengths and expertise, but we all need to share and learn. And our approach has moved from, we do provide base funding to support parent engagement at the board level, through school councils and parent involvement committees, because we do have school leaders who are very critical. And what we've been doing is drawing on those school leaders with regular communication with the minister. We've got an annual symposium, and that has evolved from just listening to strategies to actually having workshops for parents to enable and empower them, and having parents themselves engage the parents, and I think that that's absolutely critical. And in ministry, we're actually integrating what we're doing. So for example, we have the new teacher induction program, 9,000 teacher candidates. We have training sessions for them, an entire day on parent engagement that talks about our principles but gives you scenarios and tips, how you prepare for that important parent-teacher-student conference, how you prepare with perhaps some challenges, how you have that dialogue. When we did the parent policy, the important thing when we did a draft and we got feedback from people from education, was the importance of communication and the importance of having high expectations, and that parents have to have the high reasonable expectations. And when parents are really concerned, you know, great questions. Do I have to know about 1812? What about algebra? That's not the way I did it. You know, what can I do? It's talking to your child. Not nagging, not drilling. You know, Canada, when you look at the UNICEF report, doesn't do very well. I mean, we were 18th out of 25 in countries where we're actually eating meals with our kids, you know, during the week. And we were 23rd out of 25 just talking. So we've got all kinds of resources that we've developed, like, you know, reading and writing with your child, and mathematics, and it's got tips and resources. We've got fantastic resources like TVO, and on the ministry website we've got ABC 123. We have our provincial parent associations. You know, Annie's got her tip sheets. They're fantastic tip sheets. I mean, we could have written them. They are, and they're research based. And I think the thing that I'd really like to stress is that what we've done is we're working with our leaders and our administrators. In the past, we had a principals congress where we brought 200 principals. This year, together to talk about things, we had 500 of our leaders at a leadership congress, and we weaved and integrated the parent engagement piece along with the equity piece, because it's our leaders who are setting the tone and the culture of the school. And so from a ministry perspective, we're weaving in this. And another thing that we've done, and we're very proud of this, is the Building Parent Engagement piece, which was developed in partnership with the Council of Ontario Directors and Supervisory Officers. And it started out, it's evidence-informed, experience-based, but we got input from our parents. And it was so successful because it's got all of these great tips and resources. It's user-friendly. It's available on their website. We sent out this USB key to all of the schools. We heard, it was tested, focus group tested. We want something, and we needed to have for the teens. And so we've got it now for the teens, and this was designed by Humber students. It's got great resources, tips. We've also got how can you actually try and engage parents with survey resources. But I think the thing that I want to stress is that we as a ministry couldn't do this. This is the true example of integrated thinking. It's bringing together our diverse partners, getting those perspectives, and in the end you get very rich products that springboard other things. Newcomers were mentioned. And we've worked with COPA, which is an organization, and they've developed these family capsules. And they're little vignettes. There's no race, there's no gender, they're little characters, and they talk about the importance of homeschool collaboration and what do you do in terms of a telephone call. You might have this nightmare, oh my goodness, and all they're going to do is tell you about a field trip. And it's accompanied by a resource. So the thing that I would just say to wrap up is, as a parent, how important it is to talk. Because when my daughter was going through school and she was a reader, it was excruciatingly slow. And so I spoke with the teacher, and how can I get her to read? She said, let her read anything. And there was that period where we read every single dinosaur book available. I don't know where she dug them up. But then she clicked into some books, and I read the books and we would talk. And within that year, and I just want to share this with you, she won the school's literacy award. And so it's learning how to talk, and there's a wealth of resources on the ministry website, other websites with their partners, People for Education, and it's really getting at the local level. We have parent reaching out grants, where the parents with the school councils are working really hard. And from our perspective, it has to be a multi-pronged, multifaceted approach, because no approach is the right or the wrong, and it's just going to get richer and richer.
Thank you. Thanks, Ruth, very much. And we'll make sure that those, perhaps at the end I'll get Ruth to give the websites, actually any website, so Annie can, although I think it's probably all over the place. Okay, because I'd like to know where to find stepping stones and other things. Annie.
Okay, well, so luckily I get to be at the end, so I'm going to try and use my integrative thinking skills, I think, because it's really interesting what happens in your mind when you hear people say things and you go, no, well, I don't agree with that, or I do agree with this. And so I was trying to think about about the sort of tell me more, or how to put the things together, and because I was thinking about, I don't agree that parents are their children's best teachers. But maybe I just don't agree because I certainly wasn't, and I certainly didn't want to be their teacher. But on the other hand, if you think about, if you expand that idea of what teaching is, on the other hand, and you don't think of teaching as the standard thing we think of, then maybe parents, they have another role. I'm with People for Education. We did a study this year because we first got involved in this as, very active parents. And we were very active parents because there was a problem, exactly as Naeem has described. Jackie Strawn, our parent involvement, parent support coordinator, always says, you want to get parents involved? Say you're closing their school. That's the instant, way to get parents involved. And it's true. So parents often become involved because of a problem. Or they have a particular issue about their own child, so they're often active parents around special ed issues. French as a second language, parents get involved because they want French immersion programs. I think that Naeem is correct in terms of who gets involved. There's really definitely a sense that parents with the kind of the social capital, as we call it, are more likely to be involved and be heard, which is why we have to be very careful at a kind of school system level when we're having that interaction, that we're not just reacting to the parents we're hearing from, because those parents often look and sound like me. Not that I'm so great, but I'm white, I'm middle class, I went to university, I was educated in Canada, though in a lot of schools, and why should my voice mean anything more than somebody's voice who does not have all those attributes? And it is very, very important that we wrestle with that all the time. But again, back to Roger Martin, not in an either-or way, not in that person must be wrong because they're white and middle class and privileged, but how do I make sure that I'm hearing a whole bunch of things? I think that, we had a whole meeting yesterday with the People for Education Network, and nearly every single person in the room was white, I would just like to say, and I'm shocked by it myself, but they are very involved in that classic sense of the word parents. And so we have to be careful of that. First of all, that's my kind of proviso. My second proviso is being careful of the definitions, because there is a tendency, no matter what we do and how many times we go, yes, there's all different kinds of ways of being involved, there's still a tendency to call one thing involvement. And I went and made a whole presentation to a lot of principals about the research we did, and where I explained over and over, and this was just research on student success, so really just looking at student success and what kinds of parent interaction made a difference in terms of student success. And I thought I'd explained it very well. And then a principal came up to me at the end and he said, yeah, but what do we do about parents in high school? They're not engaged at all. And it was really hard not to get really mad. And I went, okay, I had 2 kids go through high school. I never ever went to the school. I was not on the school council. I went to the concerts and I went to the parent-teacher interviews. The end. I was never at school. And if you think I wasn't engaged with my children, I was, but I was engaged at home. And there's no way to recognize that. We're not measuring what people do at home. We're not interfering with what they're doing at home. So I think one of the things that happened when we did this research and we asked Naeem to read it is he went, oh, that's how this workshop got its title. He said, so maybe you're saying there's too much parenting at school and too much teaching at home. Because I think that the concern that we have had about even the materials that come at you, about what you're supposed to be doing as a parent, or the things we call parent involvement, they really hit a kind of certain kind, it maybe is the wrong thing to say, but they make you feel as if you should be doing more and more. They make you feel as if you should be able to do the math. What if I can't speak French? What if I don't care about the War of 1812? Or I just moved to Canada last week and I don't know what you're talking about, and I haven't seen the 5,000 ads on TV about it. Sorry, that was a political statement.
Sorry, 5,000 ads about what?
The War of 1812. Sorry. But so does that mean what I'm doing is not important? So we looked at 30 years of research, international research, and we looked at research that looked at the most successful students in school. So we're still talking about maybe a fairly narrow measure of student success, but anyway, that looked at the successful students and then looked at what their parents had in common. And what was exciting about looking at the research was that it's the one area that crosses socioeconomic lines. It didn't matter whether the parents spoke the first language of the country that they were in. It didn't matter if they were rich or poor. And it didn't matter in terms of these effects whether or not they were university educated or had very little education, that there were things that parents did at home that could cross all those lines and that any parent could do. And part of why I like this research is my children are kind of grown up, semi-grown up. My older daughter is learning this year that when you have a job, you have to go every day, or you get fired. She's been fired 3 times this year. So she's learning it slowly. But for me, lots of times being a parent was an incredible struggle. And so I worried about it. I felt like I was doing it wrong. I worried if my children would tell me I was doing it wrong. There was a lot of, it's hard. I think it's hard. I think it's an incredibly important, very hard job being a parent. That's being a parent in and of itself. And I think that we have to recognize that and value it and admire parents for doing this. And I remember my mother once saying to me, about me, to somebody else, when I had my first child, you'd think she was the first person in the world ever to have a baby. Maybe where some of my parenting struggles came from. But you feel like that. I mean, it is that important, even though millions of people have had babies and been parents. To you, it's a kind of awesome, amazing, terrifying experience. So I think it's important to recognize in the not either or, but the and, it's important to recognize how valuable the parent involvement at school or engagement at school is. It is valuable. It helps teachers feel supported. It helps build that sense of community in the school. It does a lot of work for the school, and it's very important. But the people who tend to be involved at school tend to come from a certain class often. There are times when there are just a few people involved and other people feel like they don't belong there. So we have to recognize that, value that, and know, on the other hand, that the things that you do at home, and there are 4, and they're easy. Well, they're not easy, but they're doable. We had a big fight about that at work too, about whether or not they were easy. They're doable things are, as Ruth said, having high expectations. That doesn't mean you better get an A or I'm going to kill you. It means an assumption. It means assuming that your child, we care about education in our house. I assume you're going to work hard. I assume you're going to do as well as you can. And you have to act like that. And sometimes it means, yeah,
Those 2.
Okay.
I said I got to do this. I was really...
Just let me finish these 2. So sometimes it means, even if you not sure how to do that, you can actually say right out loud, I I have high expectations, you can say that. Number 2 is talking about school. It doesn't mean doing homework. Homework is not on this list. It's having a conversation about school.
Tell me more.
Number 3 is work habits, which is the hardest one, which is how if you fail, your child has to learn by herself that you have to go to work every single day. And number 4 is reading with your kid in any language for as long as they'll possibly let you read to them. It doesn't mean teaching them to read at all. It doesn't mean making it homework. It doesn't mean it as part of homework. It means a joyful, pleasurable, bonding experience about reading. And those 4 things make the difference in terms of student success.
Thank you, well done. Can we? So with your permission, I'm just going to summarize quickly and then we'll move directly to Q&A. Is that all right? Rather than having, I'm just going to make that executive decision. So number 1, something that I've learned, I want to tag on the end of what Annie said. It is really important if your school does not have a bilingual library or a trilingual, bilingual books, because children need to learn in their first language. That is critical, critical, critical. The English will come and they'll learn at school, they'll learn, on the playground, but then when reading for deep meaning comes along in about grade 4, they're lost unless they've got that base of their home language. So please encourage your parents to, provide them with the resources so that they can read in both, but certainly in their home language. It also empowers parents. I loved how we've broadened the discussion because I get really, really tired of parent involvement being defined by how many, and I think we have to be careful with this at school board levels. How many parents do you have at your parent council? Why don't you have a parent council or school council? You know what? I think what I heard from everybody here, that parent involvement is diverse. Being a parent's an incredibly hard job. It should be recognized and valued for its area of expertise and for what parents can do. And I think it's a spectrum, right? We do what we can, and what we should maybe take out of this is we reach behind us and we say to a parent who's new to the school or a newcomer to the country, come on, let's go and have a cup of coffee and, just talk about our kids and about the classroom and things like that. Parent rooms are a great way to get parents into your school if your principals will allow you to do it.
What is it?
A parent room is just parent space. It's space that belongs to the parents where they can meet, they can have information or materials. It's a place that they kind of own, if you like. All right, great conversations happen. It also happens with staff and with principals who then feel that they're doing their job in welcoming some of the parents. Not all of the parents will participate. And finally, when you get to the 7, 8, and high school level, because Annie and I and probably everyone else here has done this, I just remember a story when my kids went to an alternative school here. The teachers invited us in. They specifically invited the parents without the kids. And they started off by saying, okay, your kid's brain is changing, right? And I thought I knew about my kid. She was just giving me a hard time. So they go from you being their #1 expert to you being about this big, right? Their peers. Like all of a sudden it was their peers matter. And they went on to hold a series of talks which were completely voluntary. There was full participation. It was a small school, but I would say they had 95% attendance because they were experts, they were talking about strategies, they let us talk. And you know what? So I guess what I'm saying is, it's everything. It's music, it's sport, it's meet the parents where they are. They might not want to come to school council, but they might want to know a whole lot more about the adolescent brain. And that's it. So over to you. Do we have some questions? You can make it I'd prefer if you made it for individual panelists, but we can sort that out. Yep.
Hi. Great presentations from everyone on the panel.
Can you introduce yourself too? I'm sorry.
My name is Lynn Barron, and I'm both a parent in Toronto on a CSAC and also research into education from the perspective of mothering involvement. So my question, and I'd like to ask Annie and Naeem possibly too, considering what you were discussing, is yes, these parent involvement pieces are being, from the ministry level down, are addressing only certain types of parents, but I mean, a lot of research has shown too, and as we can see by numbers at the conference and in this room in itself, is the gender perspective. So the involvement is primarily with an assumption of mothers, and I think, you know, a lot of this is the good mother discourse, that the involvement is part of being a good mother. You know, and so there's assumptions, you know, those reading, you know, it's the mother in the bed with the child. So I want to ask, you know, Annie and Naeem, like, how do you see this being, you know, obviously it's not effective, but how can there be challenges towards that? Because it's not just getting more fathers involved, it's actually about challenging why there's an assumption of the maternal.
Well, that's a really big question. No problem. I mean, there are many, you know, societal answers to that question. But I actually, maybe I'll challenge you back. I actually think that there are models that specifically go, how do we get fathers involved in that classical sense, which is at school. And in a way, what they do is that they say to fathers, and maybe this is sexist, but I don't care. Anyway, you are really important, and you're going to matter in a different way. So I know in Peel, for instance, maybe they still have them, I don't know. They would have they had father breakfasts.
Yeah.
And they actually, and it was a fantastic program, actually. And fathers came, and they came at, you know, 7:30 in the morning, and they felt kind of like, whoa, we're really important, and we're here as fathers, and somebody named us as fathers and asked us to come. So I think that you can actually, you know, I'm not going to give a big speech about what you do at home to, you know, convince fathers that they could put their coffee cup in the dishwasher, but I think that we can consciously do it at school.
Speaking person.
Yes, not in my
Jack, I think it's a great question, because I think the discussion needs to start first on what a kid needs, period, and that whole well-rounded parenting role. Like as much as I have the discussion about parenting at school and so forth, I recognize in the community that I work in, I need to be a parent at school to fill gaps. But to identify where the gaps are first. And I think what I'd like to see more of is, you know, less discussions about, you know, bake sales and the like at these meetings, and why do we have this many seats for this event, and shouldn't we, you know, and more about effective parenting and effective connections. Because I give an example of a really difficult issue that I deal with on a daily basis, which is never talked about, is the role of corporal punishment at home. And in an immigrant community, when we disengage that, saying, of course you don't hit our kids, and if you hit the kids, let's call CAS, you've just totally disengaged 90% of the world, right, that actually disciplines their kids that way. And I'm not suggesting it's a solution, but I'm telling you that from my perspective, I struggle finding appropriate consequences for kids for acts, because it's not that they overreact at home, they don't underreact in the community I'm at, and it's because if you know what your daughter did, they kick her out of the house. If I don't tell you what your daughter did, I could lose my job. So what do I do? And that's the nature of how we spend our days in many situations. And the role of the dad is hugely important, because, you know, having real discussions about things like in communities where maybe that dad's not around, and in schools where the dad's in Alberta working, it's even more difficult. But the discussion needs to happen, because, you know, if you discuss what a kid needs holistically, including that whole value structure around discipline, you know, the complaint, you know, in the school system, I find myself more and more sounding old-fashioned about, I get giving kids chances and all these things, but the consistent things we're getting back from colleges and workforce in universities, and I think it's in here, is kids are not developing the value of that work ethic. And I find that it's somewhat empowering. If you tell a kid now, if you work hard every day, you'll get promoted, that should be good news. Because we keep giving them messages how there's nothing for them. I actually feel better about my kids' future than I did 3 years ago, because I realized if they just show up and work hard, they're going to be fine. Because it's not happening out there. You know, like the research we're getting back is a lot of kids they're so used to people doing things for them. They go to jobs and think, like, I can not go 3-4 times before I get 3 full warnings. No, you're fired. And that's what's happening right now is it doesn't have to be male, but it does have to be there. And if it can be male, great. And if it's one mother doing both roles, she needs help and she should get it from the school. But recognizing that someplace, somehow, I'll say this about teenagers, you know, the ones who never speak at home, they are talking at school to someone.
Sure.
Absolutely. Okay? I've never met a kid who's not talking to someone. Okay? And the ones who are, in fact, if I see them not talking, I'll talk to them, right? Like, they do talk to somebody. The question as a parent, are you talking to the kid who they're talking to? You might not, are you at least talking to the kid that they're talking? Like, your kid is gonna go to school and talk to somebody, you can at least engage with them. Like, I put on report cards, kid talks too much, and the parents show up and go, they never speak. Can't shut them up at school, right?
Yes.
And it's understanding how there's that duality of roles and they overlap. But I think the question is exactly the type of question that needs to be part of parent engagement.
Well, it's also not having an assumption of heterosexist assumption of the family, that there is a mother and a father. It's also two dads, and there is the diversity of families, of growing population, it's always a single mother.
The last thing I'll say before I get cut off is that the most useful tool that I've been able to use in really disadvantaged situations is a 25-year-old male who's graduated from the high school, who's went to university, who's come back to the community and said, let me help you. Like in many places, that 20-something, who many times male, has been the one who's been able to get that bridge built between myself and the community and the mothers and everybody else.
I would like to, thanks Naeem, I would like to echo that because there's a program, have you heard of Success Beyond Limits? We were supposed to have, I think some of the kids were coming to film today, and that's how they work. The kids go off, they finish, usually they've struggled, they've dropped out, some of them have been incarcerated, but they have been picked up, mentored, and they've formed a group, and they are now a big part of a high school out here in the Jane Finch area, and it's tremendously powerful. Next question, yes.
I would like to know, as a parent, you have a great resources, all of you, and thank you for sharing your experience as a parent, as well as a professional in your own field. Is there any of in Toronto that I, as a parent, can come and request this, and I don't have to have a whole school hat console to access it? Do I know how to have a secondary channels for me as a parent and stay to go like this? I say, please, I need this, parents are interested in this. And not deal with all the systematic racism and discrimination for us to access it. These parents from cross-cultural communities, immigrant and refugee, even if we work in 3 jobs, we want our children to be educated. Many of us, I will challenge when you say, parents, Canadians have education and we have all of this power. Yes, you have many of us have a double degrees, but international. And the school system is still treating us like we are not even in kindergarten level.
Yeah.
And that attitude has to be changed, and I will appreciate that also. In the research, you can challenge your research consultant to address that issue, because the treatment we receive is that. And even if we speak in English already at the level of the system continues with -0 attitude, as well the way they're spoken to us. And we're intelligent beings there in front for our children to succeed. Please, can each one of you share with me and with the rest of the parents, how can we, as a parents, access it without the hat and say, we need these resources, we want from the grassroots, we want to empower ourselves to learn and to be better for our children, as well for the school and our communities, and be building great citizens.
Okay,
Can you please?
That's a great question, and your name is?
My name is Miriam.
Miriam,
And I am a parent.
from
I am a parent.
From here, Toronto, or?
That's what I say, Toronto.
From Toronto, thank you. Okay, just wanted to check. All right, so can we start with Ruth and Arlene, and then we'll move quickly?
I think we don't need to, I think,
Okay.
I think.
Well, I mean, you've raised the points that we're making, and just even go to the other point about the whole thing about our equity and inclusive education strategy is challenging people's biases, stereotypes, and working, and that's at every single level, and that's also working with our parents. So you raised an excellent point. people think if somebody is from, has a lower socioeconomic, does that mean that they're not interested in education or their kids? They're not showing up to the parent interview, does that mean they don't care? Well, maybe they're working 3 shifts, or maybe that individual had a really difficult time at school and doesn't like associating the school, is totally engaged in the child's education, but there's a piece there in terms of the person's perception.
It's assumptions too, that we don't want to be engaged, we don't want to be involved.
Yes.
The schedule, they make meetings, we are at work.
Right, right, and
And
that's,
then it's a barrier for us, because they don't want to, even if this meeting is at this time, we also repeat it at this time, you know, to accommodate parents. And if you see in the statistics in parents who have children in the school, we have a high number of parents who cannot make that schedule.
Right.
Of course, those who are able to get the information and get the other thing, and then it's trying to outreach information.
and that's absolutely critical, and that's one of the things like we're doing with the teacher candidates when we're working with teachers federations and principals associations is, you know, there are different ways that ongoing communication that I mentioned, and not having those kind of assumptions, because, you know, I keep saying, sometimes I'll hear and they'll say parents can do this, this, and this, and that. Parents are parents and busy people who volunteer time, and they're also focused on their kids, and they've got their own lives.
And we have the same goal as any parent in the school. We want our children to succeed.
Absolutely,
And we want to do our best, even,
Yes.
you know, doing homework
Yes.
late at night.
Yeah.
We want them to bring the homework. And I'm glad that you mentioned the work ethic and the samples, because I think that's what is missing a lot. You know,
So some of the things that we do, you know, as I say, we've got case scenarios where we're stressing, we've got letters and stressing that you can schedule, you need to be mindful of times that parents are busy. If they can't make that, connect with the parents. There are different ways through the phone, schedule an alternative time. Don't make assumptions that the parent isn't interested. With the COPA vignettes, for example, they're on YouTube. So they're on YouTube, it's on the COPA website, that was distributed to the schools, the parent involvement committees have them, you know, the school councils. We're working on
Do
whole
you send
school
these to kids
approaches.
online?
They're online and they're on YouTube.
Is this
So
online too?
This is also online, so we're being green in that regard. So we're really stressing that if our partners are doing work, they need to make it available so that it's online. We've got a lot in terms of the ministry website, ABC 123, and TVO has fantastic resources as well. We're working more broadly, so we're working with federal settlement workers, for example, and they're working with this just to jumpstart conversation. So you're not making an assumption that, you know, you've come from here and you don't have an education and you don't know how to navigate. It's having those kinds of conversations. What is it like in Ontario? What are the expectations? Because the bottom line is we do want to have our schools to be safe. We want them to be inclusive and accepting. We need that diversity, but we also have some common values that as Ontario citizens, we want to continue to put forth. We want to have a cohesive society, you know, have those important character and pieces.
Thank you. Annie, did you want to add?
No, there's so many questions.
I know. Naeem, do you want to address it? Because I'd like to hear some really, I think we definitely need websites and things like that. I would say that if there were a parent room or a parent space, those things could be in there, right? You could have parent educators or facilitators who would be familiar with those, who could, you know, help parents learn to use them. Naeem?
I think, you know, from our standpoint, what we could do better as schools and principals is think about how so many people are intimidated by walking in the building. Understand that, you know, I still go to a mall and laugh to see people when they see teenagers, they run to the other side of the mall. So I understand how that environment and stuff, and there's a constant self-evaluation of whether or not people feel like they're comfortable in what we're doing. But I also believe there's a challenge for us to like not wait for the parent to come in. I think we know some things that are difficult, that are barriers, and we're not dealing with them because we're in a circle of accountability, in a circle of data improvement. I'll give you a great example. I'm being pressured to raise my scores in applied level students. When I asked the question, maybe I should just lower the number of applied level students. Because I believe there's a disproportionate number of kids who are from immigrant backgrounds that are in applied classes that are actually capable of more, but because their parents don't have an attitude to get them out, they're stuck in those classes.
You're charging to increase applied faculty courses?
No,
The
scores.
Scores.
And I would suggest to you that a lot of students are in applied level classes because they misbehave and because they're not engaged. But many times the parent involvement, the way we can deal with it, guess what? They behave better, or a parent comes in and says, no, you're still staying in academic, I'll deal with the behavior, et cetera, et cetera. Well, if that conversation doesn't happen, the kid sits and applied, bored, disengaged, guess what happens, right? And if I actually do that, and I am doing it, my scores are worse. Because as I move the kids out of applied, et cetera, we have things in our system that we should aggressively look at helping those parents. But because they don't have a voice and there's no political reward to do them, we're rewarded instead by raising certain scores as opposed to dealing with some systematic barriers. And as principals, I feel like we need more say at the school level, and the people who need the most say, they don't have it, are the students. Because the students will articulate to you quite clearly what needs to happen, and giving them a voice is, I think, a big part of that solution. Because
That's a very interesting idea. Okay, hang on, we got a ton of questions, so we're gonna have to speed up because I want to get them all in. Yes.
So I want to start by saying I'm not a teacher and I'm not a parent, but I'm working within the education system a lot. And I started working with a public school in Vaughan, and we're actually doing a project where we're co-designing the outdoor learning environment and the community resource space with the students, teachers, and parents, for the simple reason that the teachers in the school realize that if they implement solutions, they're not actually the ones that anybody wants.
Right.
And so we're just starting and launching into this project, and I'm wondering what either the greatest asset or challenge will be, and if anyone has any thoughts towards that.
Who would like to, Arlene, would you like to try that one?
Oh my goodness, great question, and it really talks about how that co-constructing is critical to the success of the project, and that by bringing the home and the school and the community together, the project, you will bring in insights that there might not have been had there not been all of those partners. So in recognizing that we all have a role to play, and that we all have a voice that contributes to the success of that it creates buy-in, creates a sense of community, creates that sense of culture.
I think that's a great answer, and I think that was a great question because it feeds right into the integrative thinking. And if you can, weave that process in, I think it'll be a huge success. Yes.
Okay, so my name is Paulina, and I work in Davenport Park Neighborhood and Community Health Center with a project specifically to immigrant families and parents. And the project is called Ready for School Connect. And I want to say that I work with immigrant parents, and as hard as it is to be a parent, I think it's way harder to be an immigrant parent in a country where you're all new, you've been here almost about maybe a month or 2 months or a year. And imagine how hard it would be to send your child to a school where you have no idea how the system works. You come maybe from Afghanistan, or you come even from Europe. And the system is different, absolutely. And the program that we do is for immigrant children and immigrant parents whose children are going to start kindergarten. And I was just thinking, why just kindergarten? Let's think about every child that comes as an immigrant. And we do a program that gets them ready and do short workshops for parents to see what's the system. 7th grade child comes and they put them in the 6th grade because he is not up to date with the Canadian system. So why not put them in their age system and their grade, but have a summer workshop, for example, to get them ready for what is expected from them. So we do it for, this program has been running for more than
Okay.
10 years, since 2002. Marcelo is my manager, the manager of the program, not my but the manager of the program, and it's been great. And we have been having children, like more than 428 preschool children who graduated the program. We do workshops for the parents, we educate them, and not necessarily because they don't know how to parent, but the country is different, everything is different. So there's a new way. Even if you go to another European country, everything is different there. Even you know how to teach and you know how to parent your child. It's not a matter of knowing. It's a matter of how to get adapted
Navigating,
to that, exactly, in that country. So I'm just giving a suggestion of how can we make that possible to have immigrant children an easy way to their school, in their school. Thank you.
Okay, Arlene?
Can I also suggest that regardless of what country it is we have been born in, that navigating the system for parents in general is a challenge.
Absolutely.
And that this type of program has incredible potential for parents, regardless of where it is, regardless of what our background is.
Yes.
The system of education and teaching and learning has changed from the time that we were children, and even changes in the time from when our first enters the system to when they graduate from the system. It changes from elementary to secondary, and knowing how to navigate or learning how to navigate, or it goes back to what I talked about earlier, that professional development piece. Where is it that we can hone the skills to be involved and engaged regardless of who defines it and what it looks like? And further to that, where do we learn how to be advocates? Because at that point, we start to actually hone the skills to become advocates when we're navigating through the system. And that the additional piece of that is there's some limited research on, once we actually start to advocate for our child, we start to see the system broader and bigger, and we can advocate for all children, advocate for a better education and better communities. It just grows from there.
I think that speaks to the spectrum. That's
Absolutely. Or is it continuum?
A continuum, that's a better word.
But same, it all is.
Well, I like continuum because it implies movement, growth.
If I could say that we work with Ready for School Connects, and I've gone and done that. It is really truly a fantastic program, but I think that you're right. It's recognizing all the way through, all the time, particularly if you're a newcomer. But I think Arlene's right too, that the system itself also changes. We have tip sheets in many languages about many different things: parent-teacher interviews, high school, solving problems at school, to try to help with that sense that, because the worry is that, and I think that's why the equity and inclusion and the parent engagement offices are so important, that the worry is that there's a sense that some people belong and some people don't. That's why we've had a huge focus on equity and a concern about fundraising, all sorts of different things that come into it, because we have to make sure it's what people move to Canada for their children often and make huge sacrifices to come here for their children. So we have to fight every single day. It's why it's so great having Naeem here, to make it a system where everybody feels that they belong. And part of how you feel you belong is by having the same information everybody else does, but also part of how you feel belong is not that there's just one expectation, that that your involvement should look like this, or you don't belong. It's being able to recognize that. But it is a wonderful, wonderful program, because the kids come at the same time as the parents. So the kids are learning about kindergarten, and the parents are in the other room learning how the school system works. And it's a beautiful week.
Let me add just one component, which actually is an idea for to address the distinction, the clash between involvement and engagement. I think one of the major, the key aspect of success of the program is in the partnership. We work together always with a school board, so the Toronto District School Board. We work together with a family, early years or family center, and us, and all the partners make it possible for each school area. So going back to the involvement, the schools are capable, the teachers are capable to identify in the teachers who are those in which fathers are involved, parents are involved. So it becomes easier to bring those involved, to reach out to those involved, the parents, and bring them to exercise a more political voice, if that's the word, within the council. We can try that for partnership. You mentioned a very interesting example with the brain development and how much it changed. If you have partnership with agencies in the community that can address issues that are day-to-day realities of parents' brain development, for example, becomes easier to reach out to those involved, or even better, involve other parents as well. I just saw yesterday, Friday, an example that's happening at the Community Health Center for villages. I found it fascinating. It's a program for young parents, fathers, teaching them to cook. So the name of the program is Cooking for Real Men, or Cook Like a Real Man. I love cooking. I took 2 parental leave, and last time I was on parental leave, I mastered making soup from scratch. So I made beautiful stocks, and I really invested on it. So it was, wow, I learned a lot on my own, but having a program such as this that teach fathers that it's okay to cook, they can play a very important role economically and healthily as well. I think it's a great start.
But it's also what happens when they're learning to cook.
As well,
It's
absolutely.
the conversations
yeah.
that happen, yeah. I think I'm gonna go to there was one question behind you, and then we'll come to you. Yes?
Okay, Ruth Tisdale from Thames Valley District School Board in London. My question is actually for Ruth Flynn, and it's around mixed messaging from the ministry. So I'm going to put you on the spot, and bear with me for a minute. I think one of the barriers we have for parents being engaged is the messaging to a certain degree around the ministry that comes out as to what success means. And the ministry measures currently, and we talk whole child, but we still at ministry level, we measure EQAO scores, we measure grad weights, and we're measuring whether or not content is going into children's brains. And we measure that, and some of that filters down into the respect, right or wrong, of where parents are on hierarchies, and I don't believe there should be hierarchies. So we have people who may not have the content stuck in their brains that we've learned in our education system, but they have the skills to survive and be effective in our schools and in the workplace and in society. We're not always teaching those skills in our schools. We're still focusing so much on content, and so long as we have that mixed messaging that this is what success means, and success is a grad rate and a good score on EQAO, instead of looking at the soft life skills, because the world has changed, the access to the information is there. We don't have to carry around books anymore. The content doesn't have to be in our brains. So I think we're sometimes giving a mixed messaging that parenting, and I know the ministry is doing a lot of work around different levels and recognizing that, but parenting isn't, a continuing up and down, and there's hierarchies. It's across the board. And so we have to change the mindset, not just from parent engagement perspective, but we have to really, really value the parent role and the soft skills that parents are teaching that are more and more important as we go down the road where we can access content.
Or better yet, integrate them, blend them.
Well,
Go, Ruth.
I would say, but that's where we're coming from. I mean, we're saying we don't want, studies show you shouldn't be drilling and nagging, you need to be talking and engaging, and just as we heard, we've moved from student achievement to student achievement and well-being. And there are so many great points that are being made here. Schools alone cannot do this. The gentleman talking about having the community partnerships and parents being viewed collaboratively as partners, and yes, they're going to advocate, but having that kind of discussion is absolutely critical. Now, I'll be really frank in terms of, there still is a global society that measures things, and they look at literacy rates and how are we and where do we stand. But in terms of the cognitive skills, Annie brought up an excellent point about, we've talked about the dual language and that. Well, a few years ago it was, no, you had to read in English, and now we recognize the richness and how good that is, and the bonding and the relationships. So the point is, we've got Parent Reaching Out grants, which have received international recognition, and that is parents helping other parents, whether it's through a workshop or translation or other barriers that they've identified, which I think is really critical, to family and literacy centers, to other community agencies. It's taking that holistic approach. And where are the kids? Because we do realize, and that's where the research is informing us about the cognitive pieces. So education alone, you're absolutely right, doesn't have all of the answers. And we're talking about a transformation in terms of how the parents themselves view things too. You know, I have diversity, and we're talking about, you know, I will hear, well, I don't want my child to be a teacher or so-and-so, I want them to be, quote, in a profession. The ministry is opening up career pathways. We have high school specialist majors, dual credit. We're trying to value that diversity and differentiated learning. So
Sorry,
that's where
I
we
need
are.
to interrupt, but we're running out of time, and Naeem wanted to speak, and I want one more question, and then I'm sorry, we need like 4 hours.
I just, like, last year in my role, so I wasn't in a school last year, I was advocating on behalf of principals, so I spent a lot of time at the ministry, ready to charge through my concerns and exactly the things you're saying. And I came away with a greater sense of what politically the landscape has created. I don't know if anybody who actually stands in front of anybody now in the next election and says, I'm gonna make schools less about test scores and more about the whole child with any chance of getting elected. And I think, you know, what I came away with understanding that the people at the ministry and the government, we're almost held captive as well by this thinking, where society has yet to trust the schools. And I believe as a principal, I feel respected, but not trusted. And I don't feel that I have the say to say, you know what, I know what kids need to be successful. Like the comment earlier about the partnership, if I could just spread one thing through the system is empathy. Because any model that works is because everybody in it is empathetic to everybody else. And the people that are most disengaged sometimes, and this is a model of parenting. Why do teenagers and parents forever don't get along? Well, let's face it, they generally speaking are living a life that every parent has not understood. Like that's the nature of teenagers. They'll always dress different, be different than their parents because that's what they're supposed to do. And developing empathy for the fact that their life with social media and everything else that's happening is what all parents and systems have to do. But the system is demanding results as a way to justify the fact that it's happening. And then I've seen principals who go, I hate this, and then stand in front of the school and say, come to my school, my scores are up, right? Like, because you sell your soul to that way of, because you want to be successful. And this is where I would turn to people in the room and say, we need your help.
Right.
To spread to the system that be careful who you vote for, elect, or demand. Because if it's about work ethic and values and empathy, they may not be measurable. And you may have to trust the people in the system to define what that is and have conversations with your kid to know what's happening. It may not be a test score. But right now, I don't think the public is too open to that.
Well, because it's been a singular message, and I think it's the danger when the pendulum swings too far.
Right.
But I think everybody, it isn't just voting, right? I'm gonna say this because I'm the facilitator, that you need to be thinking we all do, between elections, and you need to be ready with your questions on the doorstep. And I really think one of them is, what is student success? For my kids, it's getting out of bed and actually getting them into school on time. For other kids, it might be a 90. But you know what? My son's disengaged, so when he's there, that's a success for him. Sorry, I beg your pardon, and you are?
I'm Angelica, and I'm from the Waterloo region.
Thank you.
My question is about school councils, in that, because of my kids' ages, I've been a part of 5 different school councils, plus some region-wide ones, so I could say that I have a lot of experience in this area. And what I've seen is that if you have an engaged, healthy school council, then you have engaged parents in that school because it spreads. It's sort of like an incubator.
True.
That small group of parents fires up the rest of them to participate. And the single biggest factor I've seen in that is the principal. Because I've been at enough schools where they'll have one principal who the whole school is on fire. Parents come in and volunteer, they do extra projects, they do fairs. The principal leaves, the new principal comes in, and the complete climate of the school changes. The new principal will micromanage everything from what you bring in your kid's lunch to whatever, but not engage the parents. And so my point is that the principal is extremely valuable in this. So how do you convince administrators? Like, I know as parents we think we're important, but how do you convince administrators that parents are crucial to school success, however you want? to the finals.
Good question. Who wants to run with that? I think Annie's jumping, okay.
So, I mean, what was interesting yesterday at the network meeting was that people talked a lot about principals in terms of, because, and I think that goes back to, again, the integrative thinking and also the empathy and also the partnerships, because what's hard, principals have an incredibly hard job, way harder than it used to be. 50% of principals that are in schools right now have 5 years experience or less. So we have a lot of new principals with an enormous amount of pressure on them to perform and to get their test scores up, and a million different aspects to their job. So we think principals are there, wondering whether your kid is in school. If the principal doesn't know your kid's name, because they can't do that because they're doing a lot of other things. So the role has changed, and there's not a lot of support for principals anymore. So that's the empathy in that direction. We think there should be actually a sort of community liaison person in the school whose job it is just to do that, and it shouldn't be the principal's job on top of everything else that they do. The empathy from the other direction, though, is that principals do often see, because parents are more likely to come to school storming in because there's a problem, and so principals are like, ugh. And I've gone to a lot of principals' conferences where they talk about working with difficult parents, working with, the nightmare parents, trying to somehow get it back down to human beings, working with human beings, is very hard. I think that parents have to think about it, school councils have to think about it, they have to try not to see the principal as the enemy, but I also think that principals need way more work, understanding that there are ways of working with parents and there are ways of not working with parents. And so, I think it's great what Ruth's talking about, the work that's being done there, because it's recognizing it, but again, not just saying it's about school councils. I agree school councils can change, working with principals can change the kind of overall spirit of the school, but I think that for principals, it's just recognizing that we're all part of this. And we all have a vast array of roles to play, and there isn't one, and there isn't also one kind of parent. And I think that that's the other, what I'll end on, is that we have a tendency to say parents think, or parents want, or parents are like this, and that is totally never true. There is not a parent. There's no parents, and we don't represent, we are not the parent's voice at all. We can't say you're a representative parent. Parents are all different, but it's the recognition, it's messy. And systems don't like messiness that much, they like tidiness. Parents aren't a system.
And on that note, we're going to end, and just as Annie said, every kid's unique, why would we expect their parents to be any different? So there are a few notes. You have forms, evaluation forms in your file. I know they're a pain. I would beg you to fill them out, because if you don't, then the wonderful conferences that they're putting on can't happen. Okay, they need that, and give them feedback, because it'll help next year's planning. I would like to sincerely thank our panel. I have just been in awe of all the different experience and knowledge they've brought to the table, and to you for coming and for your wonderful questions. And we're off to lunch, I think. So please come up if you want quickly, if you want those websites. I was looking, I don't have a blackboard. I can write it on it.
I don't think about talking about my daughter and then having her be with me.
How are you?
I wanted to touch briefly with you. You mentioned that you had some.
Thank you. I appreciated your help, and I know it was a lot of things.